Nestled along a winding road lined with willow trees and immaculate lawns stood a neighborhood called Westwood Trails. In many ways, it was a classic American suburban dream. Cozy homes with neatly trimmed hedges, driveways free of clutter, and friendly neighbors often seen walking their dogs at dusk. Children raced up and down the streets on bicycles, and seniors frequently enjoyed morning strolls, pausing every so often to rest on well-placed benches. These benches had been part of Westwood Trails for over 2 decades. They provided a sense of warmth and belonging. There were half a dozen in total, placed strategically along the tree-shaded sidewalks, near the community garden, and outside the small neighborhood park. Over time, seniors and even weary parents with toddlers had come to rely on them. They were social spots, quiet, welcoming places to chat about weather forecasts or local news. For as long as anyone could remember, life in Westwood Trails felt peaceful. There was no shortage of neighborly gestures, a plate of cookies here, a friendly wave there. The spirit of caring was woven into the very fabric of the community. Yet, beneath the tidy appearances, a storm of tension brewed. Much of it revolved around the local homeowners association, HOA. HOAs often function like mini-governments, setting rules for aesthetics and community behavior. Some residents adored the HOA for preserving Westwood Trails' pristine look. Others complained it was too meddlesome. Leading the HOA was Marilyn Coleman, a middle-aged woman whose unwavering commitment to protecting property values made her a polarizing figure. Marilyn was known around the block by a pointed nickname, Karen. Marilyn prided herself on enforcing rules, some legitimate, some that stretched the boundaries of reason. She wore prim outfits with precisely ironed blouses, always holding a neatly labeled binder of official documents. Strands of curly red hair framed her face like question marks, hinting at a perpetual look of disapproval. Neighbors often felt they were constantly under her watchful gaze. If someone's lawn sprouted dandelions or a mailbox's paint peeled, Marilyn swooped in with citations. In the early months of spring, Marilyn's newest obsession became the elderly residents who sat too long on the neighborhood benches. She started circulating rumors that the benches were unsightly, outdated, or poorly maintained, and insisted that extended gatherings might deter new buyers. But her hostility soon escalated past mere words. One April morning, while the dogwood trees began to bloom with soft pink petals, an elderly gentleman named Harold McKinley settled onto a bench in front of the community garden. Harold was well into his 70s, with a warm smile and a mild stoop, always eager to exchange friendly greetings with passers-by. He was joined by Patricia "Trish" Howard, a retired librarian who adored morning conversations about everything from the price of groceries to local book clubs. That particular day, they'd been sitting less than 15 minutes when Marilyn marched up, binder in hand, her heels clicking dramatically on the sidewalk. "Good morning, folks," she announced, forcing a grin. "I see you're enjoying the bench. Lovely day, isn't it?" Without waiting for a response, she tapped a finger on the worn wooden seat. "Just be aware, these benches may be removed if they continue to violate the guidelines set by our HOA charter. We can't have them used for indefinite loitering." Harold and Trish exchanged startled glances. "Loitering?" Trish asked, as though the word itself were offensive. "We're just catching our breath and talking." Marilyn's jaw tightened. "Yes. Well, I'm simply letting you know there have been a few concerns. People are unsettled by groups blocking the sidewalk. That's all." She snapped her binder shut and walked off. Harold stared after her, dismayed. Word of this encounter spread quickly. Neighbors whispered about how Marilyn had taken her first official stance, that older residents, especially those who lingered on the benches, were a problem. Most people dismissed it as another overreach. But Marilyn's posture was different this time, more determined, as though she'd discovered a new cause she could champion with full force. Over the next 2 weeks, notices began appearing near the benches. The HOA letterhead at the top read, "Attention! Unauthorized use of common area benches for prolonged gatherings may constitute loitering. Please limit seating to no more than 10 minutes. The letters cited obscure HOA rules about common areas and visibility standards. Residents were flabbergasted. 10 minutes? For seniors who needed real rest, that was hardly enough to catch their breath. When confronted, Marilyn insisted she was only warning people, not threatening them. However, more neighbors started complaining that they, too, had been approached and scolded for occupying a bench for too long. Tension grew. A collective question lingered. Why now? The benches had existed for years without trouble. HOA meetings in Westwood Trails usually drew a modest crowd. Some curious first-time homeowners, a handful of older folks who liked to stay informed, and of course, the regular volunteers. But after Marilyn posted her stern notices, the upcoming monthly meeting was packed. It was held in the modest Westwood Trails Community Center, a one-story building near the park. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, a portable podium was set up at the front, and a single microphone stood ready. Marilyn arrived promptly, looking expectant, as if she sensed the gathering storm. On one side of the room, a group of senior residents, Harold, Trish, and several others, were seated. Standing behind them were younger adults, including Sarah Kim, a local nurse, and David Parsons, a father of two young girls who often used the benches to take a break on family walks. They had all come to voice their disapproval. Marilyn opened the meeting with the typical formalities. Then, without missing a beat, she addressed the matter of communal seating regulations. She claimed her main motivation was liability concerns and maintaining an attractive neighborhood. She insisted seniors who sat for too long might cause foot traffic congestion or potential tripping hazards. Behind her veneer of politeness, the subtle hostility was unmistakable. When Marilyn finished, Sarah Kim raised her hand and approached the microphone. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Many older residents rely on these benches to rest during walks. To label their presence as loitering is not only disrespectful but downright dangerous. Some folks need these benches for health reasons, dizziness, joint pain, or shortness of breath." A rumble of agreement passed through the crowd. Marilyn lifted her chin. "And I'm only pointing out that we can't have large groups blocking common pathways," she countered. "It has been an ongoing complaint from some residents, though I can't name names due to privacy." David Parsons stepped up. "I've lived here for 10 years, and I've never seen groups cause an obstruction. Even if 3 or 4 people gather, it's not blocking the entire sidewalk. This is overreach, plain and simple." Applause broke out, further rattling Marilyn's composure. She tried to maintain her calm, insisting that she was within her rights to enforce policy. The meeting devolved into emotional outbursts from both sides. Yet, despite the pushback, Marilyn refused to back down. She ended the night by claiming she'd have to take more decisive measures if the benches continued to be misused. A tense hush settled over Westwood Trails for a few days. People kept using the benches, albeit warily. Some would look over their shoulders, half expecting Marilyn to materialize with her binder. Still, life proceeded. Flowers began blooming more fully, kids attended soccer practice in the local field, and retirees continued their leisurely walks. But the relative calm shattered one early morning. Around 6 a.m., a jogger named Miles Turner was finishing his daily run when he stopped, stunned. The benches placed along the park's walkway were all secured with thick metal chains and heavy padlocks. Small laminated signs read, "Temporarily closed, safety inspection pending. By order of Westwood Trails HOA." Miles couldn't believe his eyes. He counted 4 benches in total that had been chained, 2 near the park, 1 in front of the community garden, and 1 at the intersection of Cedar Lane and Maple Drive. Every single bench was forcibly rendered unusable. At a loss for what to do, Miles took photos and posted them to the neighborhood's online forum. By 7 a.m., phone calls were buzzing throughout the community. Seniors who relied on the benches for their morning walks were outraged. Parents who liked to rest on them while their kids played were incensed. Marilyn, now openly called Karen by many, was the prime suspect. In record time, a crowd gathered near the park benches. Harold McKinley was there, leaning on his cane, shock written across his face. Trish fumed. Younger folks like David Parsons and Sarah Kim arrived, too, stepping carefully around the chains to see how securely they were locked. The metal links were thick, the padlocks formidable. It was a blatant statement. "You're not welcome to sit here." Marilyn herself appeared around 8 a.m., her expression betraying neither regret nor uncertainty. She simply announced that she had filed a request for official safety inspections, and that, until those were complete, the benches had to remain closed. She cited some clause about preventing potential hazards. To the stunned crowd, she added, "It's for everyone's own good." The sense of violation was palpable. Nobody believed her safety excuse. Their beloved benches had never posed a threat in the years they'd been there. This was clearly about forcing seniors, and anyone else, off those seats. The neighborhood's frustration ballooned overnight. Outraged discussions lit up the online forum. One thread read, "Karen chained up the benches. What next?" Another simply asked, "How do we fight back?" Some residents toyed with the idea of simply cutting the chains themselves, but they worried about legal repercussions or giving Maryland a pretext to label them as vandals. A calmer, more organized approach took shape when a small group, calling themselves Friends of Westwood Trails, decided to hold an emergency meeting at a neighbor's garage. This group included David Parsons, determined to protect the inclusive spirit for his two daughters. Sarah Kim, as a healthcare professional, she felt it was crucial to defend seniors' ability to rest. Harold McKinley, representing the older generation that depended on the benches. Nia Jackson, a new homeowner who worked remotely as a legal assistant. She offered help with any official documents. They gathered in David's well-lit garage, with lawn chairs forming a makeshift circle. Boxes of children's toys and sports gear were stacked along the walls, giving the space a cozy disarray. The group outlined a plan. Collect signatures. Circulate a petition demanding the immediate removal of the chains. They aimed for at least 75% of the homeowner's signatures, enough to call for a special HOA vote. Consult an attorney. Nia had contacts who might help clarify if Maryland was acting within her authority or overstepping legal boundaries. Media attention, if needed. A local news station sometimes ran human interest pieces. The story of an HOA official chaining benches away from senior citizens might garner public sympathy. Direct appeals to the HOA board. Marilyn wasn't the entire board. She was just the most vocal. Maybe the other members would respond to collective pressure. Before the night was over, they had printed a short but pointed petition explaining how these benches were integral to the neighborhood's well-being. Then they fanned out in pairs, knocking on doors, explaining their cause with genuine passion. Almost everyone signed instantly, outraged that their own neighborhood benches were chained like contraband. Within just 2 days, Friends of Westwood Trails amassed over 80% of signatures, well above their target. They emailed each board member, attached the petition, and demanded a special HOA meeting. Marilyn, upon receiving the avalanche of signatures, did not yield. Instead, she doubled down. She posted a lengthy statement on the HOA's official website, citing multiple requests for bench safety inspections and claims that several residents had privately expressed fear about large gatherings on the sidewalks. Nobody believed her. In fact, the message only inflamed the situation. On top of that, a rumor began circulating that Marilyn had single-handedly purchased those massive chains and padlocks out of her own pocket. She then demanded reimbursement from the HOA fund. Whether the rumor was entirely true or not, it stoked fresh anger. People hated the idea that their dues might be spent on forcibly restricting public seating. Tensions rose further when a local handyman, hired by Maryland under HOA authority, arrived to remove one of the benches for repairs. Residents formed a human blockade around the bench. They refused to move, forcing the handyman to leave empty-handed. Sarah Kim was there, brandishing a copy of the petition. "We have a formal request for an emergency vote," she informed the handyman. "You're not touching this bench until the board resolves our complaint." Word spread that the upcoming special HOA meeting, scheduled for the following Thursday evening, would be explosive. Many hoped the board would see the community's overwhelming disapproval and remove Maryland's chains, once and for all. The community center was beyond standing room only. Residents spilled into the hallway, and some stood outside on the lawn, peering through windows. The special HOA session began at 7 p.m., and by 7:10, tensions were already high. Maryland took the stage, flanked by 2 other board members. Ruth Callahan, a longtime neighborhood resident who generally tried to keep the peace. Kevin Browning, a retired accountant who often avoided conflict, but was known to side with Maryland on small procedural matters. Also on the board was Amy Chun, who had not yet arrived. Rumor had it she was stuck at work, but many believed she might be intentionally delaying her entrance to avoid confrontation. Maryland opened with a speech laced with bureaucratic jargon. She presented an alleged report on the condition of the benches. "The wood is splintering in certain areas, and the old paint could harbor pests," she insisted. I am only acting in the best interest of everyone's health and safety." Her tone dripped with condescension, as though scolding misbehaving children. People whispered and shook their heads. Finally, David Parsons couldn't hold back any longer. He approached the microphone placed in the center aisle. "Marilyn, Karen, listen," he began, his voice steady despite brimming frustration. "We have signatures from over 80% of homeowners, demanding these chains be removed. We love these benches. Many of our elderly neighbors need them. If they're worn down, fine, let's repair them. But physically chaining them shut is extreme." A roar of applause followed. Harold McKinley, leaning on his cane, took the microphone next. His voice was gentle but resolute. "I fought for our country in my younger years," he said. "Now I'd simply like to enjoy a peaceful place to sit in my retirement. Is that so wrong?" Emotions coursed through the crowd. Some individuals even had tears in their eyes. Trish Howard patted Harold's shoulder, nodding firmly. Marilyn's face remained stiff, though a slight flush of color crept into her cheeks. Behind Marilyn, Kevin Browning flipped through pages in a folder, looking uneasy. Ruth Callahan cleared her throat. "We've reviewed the community's petition," she said, "and it's substantial. I propose we hold an immediate board vote on whether to remove the chains and keep the benches intact." The crowd cheered, but Marilyn tried to filibuster. She rattled off paragraphs of the HOA's charter, pointing out nebulous language about unapproved structures. Residents fired back, citing decades of precedent that the benches were donated and historically embraced by the neighborhood. Tension reached a boiling point. People demanded an end to the nonsense. Suddenly, at the back of the room, Amy Chun burst in. She was still wearing her work clothes, hair in a messy bun. Quickly taking a seat at the board table, she whispered something to Ruth Callahan, scanned the petition, and then asked for the microphone. In a calm but clear voice, she said, "This argument has gone on too long. I move to vote right now. All in favor of removing the chains and restoring the benches to full use." Kevin hesitated, glancing at Marilyn, but Ruth and Amy immediately raised their hands. Kevin sighed and did the same. That made 3 out of 4. The motion carried. Marilyn's face dropped. The room exploded in cheers. People hugged. Some even started chanting, "Unchain the benches! Unchain the benches!" Marilyn looked ready to protest, but it was too late. The board had spoken. Even after the official vote, uncertainty lingered. Neighbors feared Marilyn might still attempt underhanded tactics to keep the benches chained. Despite the crowd's excitement at the meeting's outcome, the board agreed to post a final written decision by noon the next day. That same evening, after the meeting, a covert operation unfolded. A small group, David, Sarah, Harold, and 2 high school seniors, Alex Cruz and Mia Roberts, met under the cover of darkness. They carried bolt cutters, thick gloves, and a wagon full of painting supplies. Their plan: break the chains themselves and repaint the benches to show a renewed sense of community. Around midnight, they quietly visited each chained bench. The streets were mostly dark, with only a few street lamps illuminating the sidewalk. One by one, they snipped through the chains. The metallic sound of breaking links echoed softly in the night, a triumphant melody of defiance. Trish and Harold kept watch for any sign of Marilyn, but the neighborhood was eerily still, everyone seemingly asleep. Once the benches were free, they rolled them a short distance to a nearby garage. Throughout the night, volunteers sanded down rough wood, hammered in loose nails, and applied fresh coats of paint. Their colors varied: light blue, goldenrod yellow, pastel green. Each bench gained a small, hand-painted message. One said, "Neighbors first." Another read, "Rest and belong." When dawn came, the refurbished benches were returned to their original spots, gleaming in the early sunlight like renewed symbols of unity. Exhausted but exhilarated, the group parted ways, excited to see the neighborhood's reaction in the morning. By 6:30 a.m., joggers, dog walkers, and early risers were in for a shock. The benches, once chained and cold, were now fresh, bright, and welcoming. Word spread with lightning speed through text messages and the community's online forum. Photos popped up showing vibrant benches with uplifting words scrawled in decorative letters. Reactions were unanimously positive, Maryland being the probable exception. Harold arrived to find his favorite bench near the community garden sporting a cheerful sunflower motif on the armrests. He lowered himself onto it carefully, a grin lighting up his face. Nearby, a woman snapped pictures. "This is beautiful," she breathed. Even children, usually oblivious to adult battles over HOA rules, found themselves drawn to the colorful seats. They skipped up to the benches, running their hands along the fresh paint, giggling at the whimsical designs. The official HOA statement followed by midday, confirming that the board had indeed voted to remove the chains and keep the benches. By then, the chains were already gone, cut and discarded in a local scrap bin. Photos of the new benches dominated the local social media pages, accompanied by hashtags like #CommunityMatters and #UnchainedHearts. For a brief moment, people almost forgot Marilyn existed, until they saw her, mid-morning, striding furiously down Maple Drive. She paused to inspect the newly painted bench at the intersection, her eyes narrowed. The fresh color was a stark contrast to her grim expression. Some neighbors watched from their windows, expecting an outburst. Sure enough, Marilyn pulled out her phone, snapped pictures, and typed frantically. A few minutes later, she posted a scathing update on the HOA website. Unauthorized modifications have been made to HOA property. An investigation is underway to identify those responsible for vandalism. But hardly anyone took the post seriously. The benches were not defaced, they were repaired and improved. Moreover, the official board vote stood in direct contradiction to Marilyn's claim. The other board members quickly distanced themselves from her statement. Amy Chin even posted a public correction, clarifying that the painting was considered a positive refurbishment and not vandalism. Isolated and outnumbered, Marilyn appeared to realize she no longer controlled the narrative. Her demands that the vandals be punished found no traction. Some speculated she might attempt a lawsuit, but with no one else on the board backing her, her threats seemed empty. For the first time in recent memory, Marilyn Coleman was not only defied but openly dismissed. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in Westwood Trails felt lighter. The seniors no longer feared sitting on the benches. Parents brought iced tea or coffee, stopping for mini breaks while their children played. Younger adults found themselves smiling each time they passed the bright colors and kind slogans. The transformation extended beyond the benches themselves. Neighbors who rarely spoke now paused to chat. The entire chain-chopping operation became a kind of local legend. People joked, "You better be nice, or the bolt cutters might come back." But they did so in good humor, aware it was a sign of collective unity. A week later, the neighborhood hosted an impromptu bench celebration picnic. Tables and chairs were set up in the park, near one of the most popular benches. Families brought potluck dishes, potato salads, homemade cookies, freshly grilled burgers. Sarah Kim led a brief dedication, thanking everyone who contributed, from the covert paint crew to the seniors who originally championed bench rights. Harold, beaming, raised a plastic cup of lemonade and a toast. To the benches that brought us together, and to the neighbors who had the courage to fight for them. The crowd clapped and cheered. Children ran around with balloons, a small acoustic band played lively tunes, and even local dogs pranced around sniffing the air. In the swirl of laughter and chatter, one might have noticed Marilyn Coleman watching from a distance, arms folded. She stayed behind a tree, never fully joining. Some neighbors waved politely, but she didn't wave back. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of chained benches became more of a curious anecdote than an open wound. The HOA board carried on its typical duties, reviewing budgets, discussing landscape improvements, planning community events. Marilyn, though still nominally on the board, found her authority greatly diminished. She no longer had the influence to implement drastic measures unilaterally. Friends of Westwood Trails remained active. They met monthly, brainstorming ways to improve shared spaces. A children's reading corner at the park, a mini-free library near the community entrance, or even a small mural project. Slowly but surely, the bench fiasco sparked broader engagement. Folks discovered they could shape their neighborhood for the better by uniting and standing firm. As for Marilyn Karen Coleman, some said they spotted a flicker of regret in her demeanor. She tried pivoting to new issues, like complaining about unlicensed dog walkers, but found little support. Fewer residents answered her emails or attended her personal info sessions. She lingered in her meticulously kept yard, occasionally glancing at the cheerful benches, perhaps wondering how her plan backfired so spectacularly. Despite the lingering bitterness, neighbors in Westwood Trails chose not to ostracize her completely. When next spring's festival rolled around, they dropped an invitation in her mailbox, just like everyone else. There was a quiet belief among many that she might, someday, set aside her self-righteousness and rediscover the genuine sense of community Westwood Trails prided itself on. And so, the benches stood in testament to the victory of fellowship over pettiness. Painted bright and inviting, they endured as a daily reminder that when neighbors unite, whether they are young families, single professionals, or elderly retirees, they can overcome even the most stubborn obstacles. The story served as a lesson that sometimes the most ordinary objects, a park bench, a potluck dish, a coat of paint, can become catalysts for extraordinary acts of unity. In the end, everyone found room to sit, rest, and connect, ensuring Westwood Trails remained not just a beautiful suburb but a genuine community.